For more information about us, please visit www.arundelcameraclub.org. We are now meeting in person and also online. If you are online and local to Anne Arundel County, Maryland, we encourage you to visit us at the Severna Park Baptist Church, located at 506 Benfield Road, Severna Park, Maryland. Before tonight's program, do we have any announcements from officers? Any other news? Any other good news, bad news? What's that? Dues are half price. So I think, I think last contest that if you come up and pay the $20 for dues, you still have like 36 photos with the contest coming up to get great judge feedback on. But if you've ever been interested in joining and submitting your photos to the contests, this is a great time for that. So thank you, Jackie. I think we're done with the, Everybody who's wanted an ornament, I think, has gotten it. We have some that are still there, and we're not going to bring them back after tonight. So if you want that, that's $5, and the entire $5 goes to the club for that. Christine, would you like to come up and talk about the upcoming schedule? Come around the other way for me, dear. Okay. Christine Milliker, your programs chair.
Good evening. Let's see. This weekend on January 19th is our field trip to Eastern State Penitentiary. I believe you need to get tickets before you go. So, and there are several people. There's a thread on the Facebook page for people who are going to get together and go around photographing together. Next week on January 23rd is our next contest, which is our print contest with the theme of open. On January 30th, we're having a tabletop night. If you want to bring anything in to photograph, please talk to Bob or Mike, who will be running the evening for us. On February 6th is a program by Ron Pfeiffer on photographing the Southwest. February 8th is our field trip to the Washington, D.C. For Monuments at Night. February 13th is our next digital contest with the theme of geometric photography. And then February 20th, Ryan Maurer is coming back to talk about cave photography again. And that's our schedule. Tonight, we have our very own Jackie Colestock talking about geometric photography. And she considers herself a designer and has been formally trained in sketching and painting. And she has been a member of the Arundel Camera Club since fall of 2008, where she joined us after meeting Howard Penn, who was our last two presidents ago. And she has an artistic background and got her first camera when she was young, and here she is talking about geometric photography. Sorry, I don't want to read it all.
Secretary Treasurer for how many years? 8 years.
8 years here as our Secretary Treasurer. So I'll hand this over to Jackie.
Evening. What's interesting about me that is not quite in my bio, I had a strong fine arts background, and when I went to Penn State, my parents sat me down and said, yeah, fine arts doesn't pay the bills, so you need to do something. So I spent 30 years as a registered landscape architect, and when people asked what I did, I said, I design outdoor spaces. So that's why I said I consider myself a designer, as more than particularly an artist. And when people look at it, they go, you don't know anything about design. It's like, yeah, I do. Okay, geometric photography. When this went through the theme committee, there was a lot of discussion about what exactly is geometric photography. And people often get hung up on, is it or isn't it abstract? It's just another way to do it, sneak the abstract in there. Not exactly. So this is what we put out on our website. And if you look at it, it's these lines and shapes. Focus on the resulting image will be the geometric lines and shapes and patterns formed. There may be a strong sense of a repeating pattern. It's not required. There may be a strong sense of abstract also, not required. The object is to see geometric shapes in the environment around you. And that is the key point of the definition. The object is to see geometric shapes in the environment. And this is not something we're accustomed to doing. Nobody just sort of looks at the environment and goes, wow, that column is a rectangular prism. We just look at it and go, it's a column. So I decided to back up. Geometric photography is photography relating to geometry. Don't you just love circular definitions? Well, we all understand the photography, but what exactly is geometry? Does anybody remember your geometry? I mean, it was back in the dark ages of high school, unless you did an engineering field and used it a lot. Yeah, the dark ages. I teach Tai Chi to students. I have students ranging, I've had them from 7 to 93. And I will tell you, one of the things that never ceases to amaze me is you will have people standing on a floor with a 12 by 12 visible grid on the floor in tile. Tell them to turn 45 degrees. Half of them can't do it. It always makes for interesting. It's like, no, 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 you're over-rotated. Don't you remember geometry? And they're like, what's geometry? So geometry, it's a branch of mathematics. It's actually one of the oldest branches. It rates right up there with arithmetic. In Western civilization, it goes back to the Greeks, but we also find it in Indian mathematics and ancient Chinese mathematics. So every culture has somehow figured out how to work with geometry. It's found just about everywhere, and it's pretty hard-pressed to find an art or a science that does not do anything with it. Your graphic arts, of course, architecture, engineering, physics, medicine. It's found in all of them, but most especially in those of a graphic nature. So this is going to be your graphic arts, painting, etching, sketching, architecture. It's also found a lot in nature. We'll get to that. Originally, it was developed as a way to model the physical world when studying it. One of the reasons for this is that it is an easy way to distill an object down to its basic shapes, which can help you to understand it. Because what geometry does is study the property of shapes, because ultimately it is all about the shape, their arrangement, and how they relate to each other. But how do you see it? First, let's look at our basic shapes. And yes, there will be pictures in this, don't worry. You're all sitting there going, it's a photography class, where's the pictures? Basic shapes. Geometry defines many definitions for our shapes. You have a zero dimension. Zero dimension is a point. Kind of hard to photograph. Oh, sorry, went backwards. I'm not too good at this part. Single dimension. Take the point and run it, and you get a line. And that's your single dimension. Again, unless you're like Picasso, it's a little hard to photograph. 2 dimensions. Take the line, connect it. Now, whether you connect it as a circle or you put angles in it, you get a 2-dimensional shape. It encloses a space. We'll discuss those a little more in a minute. Take that same shape, which I didn't, I'm sorry, and extrude it or rotate it, and you get a 3-dimensional object. Rotate a circle, you get a sphere. Take the same circle and extrude it, and you get a cylinder. 4 or more dimensions. Yeah, that's really getting up there. These are usually created only in the computer. They're known as impossible shapes is actually what they're called. And the most familiar one people will see is a Penrose triangle, also known as a tri-bar, and that's our little GIF going on over there, or GIF for some of you who pronounce it that way. Interesting part about a Penrose triangle, if you've ever seen them, they were developed by a father-son team by the last name of Penrose. Familiar with M.C. Escher? They developed it after M.C. Escher sent them a copy of one of his prints or etchings of one of his impossible buildings. And they started playing around to get our lovely little friend over there. Again, kind of hard to photograph. So, given that, we are photographers. We take a three-dimensional world and we condense it into an image on a two-dimensional surface. So we're basically going to be discussing 2 and 3D shapes. I just thought you'd kind of like to see the little guy go round and round. 2 dimensions. Has height, has width. Basically, this means the shape is flat. Now, this is actually, and as I do most of the photographs are mine, I will tell you the ones that are not. And some of them are finished photographs, some of them are raw out of camera, and some of them are in draft form. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of them, and I will try to keep it fairly quickly. This is Trinity Chapel door at Duke University. This is a window in the door. When I took it, it didn't do a whole lot for me. So I did a fair amount of post on this. I blacked out the glass so it wasn't shiny, and then started playing around with levels till I got the texture of the wood that I was after, but the shape itself is still relatively flat. Millstone. This was set into a walkway in the front of the Wyeth Museum, if you've ever been there. It's in the Brandywine area. I took this with a cell phone. This is still in draft. I've done a little bit of light work on it, and I've removed some of the extra leaves, and I had to crop it because cell phones love panorama. But so far I'm pretty happy with it. But again, it's a flat shape because of the way they set that down. I cannot get a look at the side of it. This is a ceiling medallion in Faneuil Hall in Boston. Sometimes you gotta look up. I laid on the floor. I had to wait for the tour to leave and was able to get into the hall, right in the aisle, lay on the floor directly below it and get this. And it did require a fair amount of post because the lights were on. And when the light's on, that centerpiece lost its detail, and the detail was in there. I had to work to bring that out. But from this position, you get a flatness to it. Even though the plaster work of that flower shape has dimension, taking it from this angle, you lose it. And if you have questions, I like participatory classes. This is a before. This is fresh out of camera. This is taken at Springwood, which is an estate up in Hudson Valley. Now, as it came out of camera, I wasn't too filled with it, but I liked the circles. And this was the best angle I could get. This was on a wall in a barn. I do not know what it is for. If anybody knows, I would love to know. But in playing around with it, I'm starting to be able to make it appear flatter. Lose the background and start to play with some of the light around the circles themselves. I liked it in black and white. I don't think the color did anything for it. But it's an object on a wall, and in this case, the object itself is circular. You'll notice I like circles. I teach Tai Chi. We deal with circles all the time. But you can find a lot of this stuff. Pediments will give you triangles. Doorways and windows give you rectangles. This is an out of camera as it came. This was at FDR's estate, and this is down. You walk down a pathway to the river. When FDR's family owned it, they would take in a lot of things off the river. It's on the Hudson River. But they also did a lot of pleasure boating. And this, we were told, was used to tie up the small pleasure boats. I liked the fact that this had created that. So we ended up with 2 circles. And so I'm playing with that. It's about the geometry that this item has created. Now, this is not abstract. You know what it is. If you went out there, you'd find it. You know, I'd tell you to go down this road, go down the road to the thing. It's off on the side, just buried in a rock, assuming it's still there. You'd be able to find it. Sometimes you can do that. This is in Newmarket, New Hampshire. It's a mill race. If you know how mills are run, a mill race is the water used to run the mill. This was not taken to be a geometric photograph. This was taken because I was experimenting with long exposures without a tripod. As in, finding something you can set the camera on so that it doesn't move. There was a lot of water going over it. It was only a 0.6 exposure. But I have a granite wall. I have a triangle here because the wall was shifted when they built it in 2 phases. And then I have the water running. And what I like as the geometry is I have this rectangular shape here, I have a shape here, and I have another one here. And yes, I will admit, this is abstract. Because you could probably walk around forever in the same place and not find where I took this. Three dimensions, and I want to thank Kathy Huckle for allowing me to borrow her photograph. Height, width, and a length or a depth. Take a circle, spin it, becomes a sphere, as I said. Extrude it, you get a cylinder. Take a triangle, you can turn it into a prism, you can turn it into a pyramid. Three-dimensional shapes. If you've been to Cairo and can take the pictures of the pyramids, good for you. Then you have spirals. Spirals are a type of curve defined by mathematical equations that can be described using geometric principles. So they are a three-dimensional geometric shape. We'll get to spirals. This is Portland headlight. Like I said, cone becomes cylinder. And you can see that it's round from the change in the light pattern across it. It is not flat. One thing I would caution if you're a beginner at this, and I was when I took this, yeah, pay attention to what's going on down here, that whole thing of starting in corners. So check your viewfinder well. And I didn't watch for what I like to call warts, because they need to go. So yeah, this has never been in competition and never will. But it's an interesting angle to take sometimes tall items from. There's a monument in Boston on the North Hill that you can, the Bennington Monument, straight up. It's really something to do. Another cylinders. These are from I never say this right. Thank you. Lannaconning Silk Mill. I keep trying to drop that syllable out of there. And they're just cylinders.
Jackie, from that perspective, how big are those cylinders?
These are spools. They're about that big.
So maybe 4 or 5 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, they're about 4 or 5 inches in depth. And oh, yeah, I was asked how big were the cylinders, and they're actually spools. And this is what the silk was wound onto. I have one sitting on my desk, and they're about 4 or 5 inches in height. And they were probably about maybe 1.5 inches in diameter. So they don't have to be big. In fact, one of my favorite things to photograph is macro. Glass spheres, also known as marbles. Marbles are fun. This was a tabletop night. And we have the shape formed here, and you've got your sphere. This one actually, I think, took an honorable mention. Now, if you've not photographed glass yet, be prepared. Glass can be a bit of a challenge. You end up with extra highlights, blowout areas you don't want to deal with, and then the occasional reflection of yourself, which nobody wants. But This is small. You can set this up on a table. Easy to do. Other things that become interesting, sometimes you'll find yourself looking through the inside of the shape as opposed to seeing the shape itself. The shape is formed by what's around it. This is the American tobacco, I don't remember if it's a park. Doug Wood knows exactly where it is because he took me there. This is in Durham, North Carolina, and they saved the cigarette plants and turned it into, I think it's housing and an economic site. One of the ways that they handled stormwater was to lift, so your second floor, and create a catchment area that is also, when it's dry, a seating area. So these are supporting the second story of the building. And if you stand at the end, you see all these triangles going all the way down. Or you do that. Anybody want to guess what that one is?
Trapezoid.
It's a trapezoid, but what is it?
Is that a boat?
It's a boat. This is a storage area in the bow of a boat taken at the America's Cup Museum in Newport, Rhode Island. Now, I will admit to removing a rather inopportune placed support post in the middle, but I liked the repeating shape going back into the bow.
Jackie, Doug said that the American Tobacco Campus.
So it's the American Tobacco Campus. It was the third word I couldn't remember. Thank you, Doug. This is the JFK Memorial in Dallas. Has anybody else ever been there? Yeah, you'll see the whole thing a little bit later. I jokingly refer to it as the Lego Monument because it just looks like it's made out of Legos. This is taken from inside it, and it's open to the air. And I was intrigued when I was in it with the circles running up on the edges and the use of these rectangular pieces of concrete. So I started playing with it and got that one. And then I started to look at it again and see, well, can we do something a little different with it? I'm still not sure I'm happy with it. And it's still a work in progress. But this is pieces of structure. Oh. When my son and his wife got married, they wanted a maraschino cherry nut cake for their wedding cake. My mother was making it. I will tell you, one recipe takes 1/4 cup of cherries after they've been cut into 16ths, which you can't do in a food processor. It turns it into cherry mush. So we were getting ready to cut cherries. This was a cell phone picture I grabbed because I liked the cherries. And I still haven't worked with this one much. But when you focus in on the cherries, you've got your round shapes and things to work with. So yeah, what have you got in the kitchen? Take a look. Spirals. This one did win a ribbon in competition recently. Good place to look for spirals is ironwork. For some reason, ironmongers love to make these things. This is a gate at Bok Tower in Florida. This is the bottom of a staircase banister in an older home. If you go into historic homes, this is another way they often finish them. And you will find varying things going on here. Depends upon where the home was built and what they wanted to do with it. One thing I would caution you on why this photograph is not great. Don't you love it? I'm admitting why it's not great. If you're going to do a spiral, your center point needs to be in focus, and this one's not. So it's something. And I actually took and turned this sideways. So spirals. You find spirals in a lot of your older homes. They love to use them in molding. This is window molding at Williamsburg. And they bring it in and they bring it around. And between the shape of the molding and that wonderful green color, This one is another one. If you're new to doing this, give yourself a little bit more space on the outside, because once you straighten a photograph, you can lose things. There's leaf on the end of this. When I straightened it, I lost it, and I can't get it back. So just take the picture you think you want and back off just a little bit. Anyone want to guess? Good. This is from the National Historic Park dedicated to the textile mills in Lowell, Massachusetts. And these were the stairs that the mill girls would run up and down every day. They'd go up in the morning, come down for lunch, and then go back up again. And spiral stairs can give you some really fascinating patterns, because sometimes they're really tight, sometimes they're spread out. This one, I had not seen many that were actually clear up in an oval pattern. Often instead of oval, they'll square off your landings. So we've got our shapes. Now, what do we do about our repeating patterns? Geometry has several pattern types. It never has just one of anything, does it? Tessellations. This was my new word for the week. Symmetry. We all think we know what that one is. And one of my personal favorites, fractals. I love fractals. I think they're cool. Tessellations. A tessellation is a repeated shape that completely covers the space without gaps. So if you think of Escher's work, and if you're familiar with it, he has one where he goes from fish to birds, and there's no space between this change. That is a form of a tessellation. Roof shingles are a form of tessellation. Brickwork can be a form of tessellation. This is actually roof tile in Petersburg, Virginia. More roof tile. This is from Asheville, North Carolina. It's on Biltmore. If you went to Fredericks, anybody know what this is? I love this one. I wish I had seen this when I was still working. This is a drainage cover in the canal region of Frederick, Maryland. And I think it's one of the prettiest drainage covers I've ever seen. And it's also a form of tessellation. You've just got all these leaves. And to form the spaces, they just cut the outlines of the leaves. It's a cafe window. It's in Luray, Virginia. Glass block. I know it's fallen out of favor, but you still find it here and there. And you've just got this grid pattern of glass. This is the ceiling at the Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. And if you haven't been there and you get in that region, you need to go see this. It's a fascinating building. The art's fascinating. Dali's into, if you're not familiar, he's well into surrealism. This piece I could not get away from. We were there about the weekend it had opened, so it was packed. The staircase is a circular staircase, and as it goes up, when it gets to the top, this is the extension of the banister of the staircase. They just took it up in Dali fashion. But the ceiling is this wonderful tessellation pattern of triangles. And I got fortunate we didn't have too much sun that day. I could actually get the ceiling. This is the World War II memorial. It's World War II monument in Washington, D.C. Question?
That reminds me of Varese, I think, one of those observation where you can look out.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's glass triangles or shapes.
They like to use that as a ceiling piece. This is the World War II memorial. There is a wall in that memorial full of stars. Each star represents so many casualties. I'm not exactly positive whether this would be a tessellation or not, but stars are geometric shapes. So you've got this repeating pattern of stars all the way across it. So if it's not exactly a tessellation, it's pretty close. Symmetry. And thank you, Bob, for allowing me to borrow your photograph. Bob and symmetry are kind of like synonymous here. Symmetry is a pattern that's repeated through reflection, rotation, or translation. This includes kaleidoscopic patterns. Now, this one is interesting because at first glance, that's not symmetry. The thing is, the building is. The building is an 8-sided colonial British fort, was built in a geometric, symmetrical fashion. Every single wall is exactly this pattern with the squares. And it is up on the second floor to allow for vision. So you enter it through the center and come up from the bottom of the floor into this space. Now, fortunately, we do not have to tell the judge exactly which kind of geometry we're using. But I liked the way they came together. And you can see the woodwork at the top as part of the construction. The entire building's made out of granite except for the roof. This is a set of stairs. Technically, they're not spiral stairs. They have another name for these, and I couldn't find it. Spiral is circular. Every single stair is a form of a triangle. And these are often found in colonial and pre-colonial homes. National cemeteries. This one's in Sarasota. You can get some nice geometric work and you can get some geometrical arrays out of these. My concern with the problem with the National Cemetery is trying to find the photograph that's just a bit different, because everybody takes this one. But you can see the lines working, and you can start to see the way they all move through it. So work with the geometry in a cemetery if you want to do the cemetery. Move yourself around and see what else you can find. This one has showed up and the judges never understand it. This is actually from the Corning Glass Museum. It was a glass. And the glass was on display behind a glass wall. So I always love the comments of, well, you should have moved the glass. Yeah, it would have set off a lot of alarms if I did. What I did was I took the photograph of the glass and got the best glass image I could get, and then I worked with the goblet of the glass and kaleidoscoped it 4 times. I also have spirals. Same here. I kaleidoscoped a roof pattern from the St. Alphonsus National Historic Shrine that's here in Baltimore. Churches, especially older Catholic churches, can give you some really nice ceiling patterns that you can start working with kaleidoscoping and bringing in different shapes. They also often have interesting graphics in the ceilings.
So when you say kaleidoscope, you fold it once, and then 90 degrees and fold it again?
And fold it again. Yeah, Bob had asked about when I mentioned what kaleidoscoping is. Kaleidoscoping is when you take a portion of an image and you can book match it once and then perhaps book match it again, and usually around a center point. So this is when you're putting the image together, you want to make sure that you've got something that you're going to do about your center point, because it is going to end up being in the center of the image, and this is where the eye often comes to rest. So what I actually did with this after folding it and kaleidoscoping it was took one of these and recreated it here. Because I can tell you the way these pieces came together was okay, but not great. And by doing that, I had one look at go, I want to go find this church. This looks like a really interesting ceiling. And it is an interesting ceiling, don't get me wrong. But this is what I saw when I looked at the ceiling. Fractals. Now, fractals are a little harder. Fractals are found a lot in nature. And I do not have many pictures of fractals. Believe it or not, I have tons of pictures of plants, and I figured I've got ferns, and I went looking everywhere, because usually when you talk about fractals, the first thing people come up with is ferns. None of my pictures of ferns were going to work to explain what I wanted to show you. So we're working here. This is the center of a sunflower. This also counts as a tessellation. A fractal is a complex repeating pattern where smaller parts resemble the whole. These are found, like I said, they're found throughout nature. We don't see them a lot in the man-made world, and part of the reason for that was because until we had computers that could do it, and this would have been in the 80s when I was in college, we could not do the math. And I'll never forget the first fractal image my then boyfriend, now husband, sent to me. He said, I thought you'd find this cool. And I'm like, oh my God, this is wild. But you need the computer power to produce them. So this is not an object that you're going to find probably on the side of a building, but you will find it in plants. And what's fascinating about nature is that fractals occur on micro levels, small parts of plants, fiddleheads, fern leaves. The leaflet of a fern, and it's not a leaf, it's actually a frond, but the leaflet, for purpose of discussion, resembles the full mature frond. It also occurs on macro levels. If I want to teach you about flooding, I would show you a puddle after waters run through after a particularly hard storm, and how things get dropped on the edge as the water moves through. And then I could take you out to a place like, say, Patapsco Valley State Park and have you see the same pattern, only instead of little twigs and little pieces of grass on the side of the edge of the high water mark, you'd be seeing trees. But the pattern is the same, it's just the scale. So that's the thing with fractals in nature, is it's often scale. This is a sunflower bud. And you end up with this same type of fractal thing going on, with the small leaves and the large leaves reflecting the same. So there's our basic shapes and patterns. Now, where can you find it? And we've covered some of this. Exterior architecture. That is the JFK Memorial in Dallas. And if you want to understand it, the only way to understand this thing is to Google it and read the artist's description. Because there is literally nothing out there. There's no eternal flame. This is not a fountain. It wasn't turned off. That's it. But you've got a very nice cubic space. Interestingly enough, the way he's got it opened, it is opened on, I believe it's all four sides. And we've got our repeating circles, and the same with this repeating rectangular shape. And he's lifted it up, which is a little different for a building, having the space under it. This was taken at the textile mill. And what I'm working with, and this is really a work in progress, what I'm working with was I have this shape here. So I think it's a chimney, but this one is conical. It actually gets a little wider as it gets down. I have an 8-sided tower. I have a 4-sided tower, and then I've got the same patterns repeated in the chimneys. This one's had nothing done to it yet. It has potential. We have the geometry of the windows and the pattern. I also have these wonderful X shapes forming diamonds. By the way, I have never ever seen a fire escape like this anyplace else. So there may be something there to work with, but the shapes are there. It's something to start with. This is the Saco River covered bridge. I used the opening square on my side of the bridge, photographing through to the lattice squares on the other side. Oh. Banister. This is actually a balustrade in Biltmore in Asheville, North Carolina. And we have all these circles. One of my favorite buildings, and I'm not a modern architecture person. This is the Smithsonian Museum of Modern Art in Washington, D.C. And I have an image in my head, and I'm still working to get it out of this building because I know it's in there. But you've got these wonderful shapes going on. And I don't remember which facade this is. It's the one that faces the Museum of American Art. So this is between the two museums on the mall. The National Building Museum. We've got wonderful triangles, and they're repeated in the pediment on the top. And sometimes you can get that building to do that, if you know where to stand. And that's the, as it says, District Columbia Court of Appeals. But I managed to get the pediments lined up. So it's actually two buildings. This one's set quite a ways back, but working with double triangles. This is the Canadian Embassy on Pennsylvania Avenue. And I am not sure, but you may not be able to take this shot anymore. This was taken off the balcony of what was the museum, which was next door. And my understanding is that if that building's not gone yet, it's supposed to be redeveloped and torn down. This building is a very modern building and had all these cubes going on in different places and rectangles in it. And then you've got this nice soft fuzzy grass going on to soften things. Interiors. Arched hallway in the Library of Congress. They repeat all the way down. Need to be careful of symmetry with these, because it's not going to look right if you're off just a little bit. Balustrades. I have no idea where I took this. But I know it was a second floor looking down onto a living room in a very expensive house museum. This is a roof of it's a ceiling inside a steamboat at the Shelby Museum in Vermont. Not only arched, but then you have all of them coming together and you've got these triangles starting. And then the repeating pattern of the archway. It's the ceiling in the Peabody Library Reading Room. The biggest problem I had with this is I still like the repeating shape. They repeated the skylight shape was a repeat of the balcony shapes of the room. And then they stuck a desk or reading desk right where you'd need to stand to get perfection. Circular stairs. These are back stairs in an estate. This is what the servants would go up and down. But wonderful little triangles, especially the way the light hit them as they come down the steps. And then you've got what the boards are doing as they go back up. And yes, this has been straightened. The wall is not. Union Station ceiling has a beautiful repeating pattern of the hexagons. It also has a very nice skylight. That is a set of stairs inside a lighthouse looking up from the bottom. And you have varying, again, the triangles are starting. You've also got the work of sides of arcs from the center post. Ruins and parks can give you an interesting thing. It's interesting what ruins do as they come down. I have no idea what this building was used for. This is at Fort Washington in Maryland, southern Maryland. It's an interesting fort. And you just got these squares from one to the next, big holes in the wall. Stairs climbing up to the top of the battlement wall. And all I did was look down. I liked the rectangles once I got the picture into post and started cropping. My first field trip with the group, and if anybody remembers where we went, it was someplace on the Eastern Shore.
St. Mary City?
Nope. But we have this wonderful square and these wonderful rectangular board and batten wall, and then we've got these beautiful circles across the front of it.
Furnace?
Yes,
Furnace?
I think it was.
Furnace?
I think so.
No.
No, that's in Frederick.
No, it was some furnace on the Eastern Shore, because another picture in this same group had pipes and furnace equipment. Playing with fractals. This is a piece of glass that has been rotated, and it was actually looking through the glass, and then I took a portion of that and then rotated it around. So this is something, you can do this with cut glass. Shine light on cut glass, and then use a piece of that and then rotate it to get the pattern that you're after.
Furnace Town.
That was it. That was a long time ago. Everyday objects. This was our COVID assignment, if you were here. Yeah, we all remember the toilet paper. But I have my lens ball, it's my sphere, and then I have this nice cylinder going on behind it. And lens balls can be an interesting thing to work with because it'll give you a sphere, and you can often get an interesting reflection in it depending upon how far away your subject is. Just remember, your reflection is going to be upside down unless you want to go to the trouble of post and rotating it. That's just a window. But it has an interesting light pattern in it, and I liked the way, if you notice, this is an old window. One of the ways you can tell is the depth, and I think I took this through the wall of a lighthouse, which would also account for the depth of the window. But you get this nice depth coming in here and the beginnings of a rectangular prism. Spiral. That is actually a comb-back Windsor chair, and that is from the Brandywine Museum. And that was taken with a cell phone. So in short, you can find geometric photography and geometric subjects just about anywhere you want to look, including plants and nature. Now there is one caveat, because there are two items people think are geometric and they're actually not. The first one is a Fibonacci sequence. Sorry, Bob. The second one, which surprised me to no end, was the golden mean. That particular spiral is not considered geometric. And there were paragraphs explaining why, so I didn't go into that. But They're not. And like I said, I didn't have any decent images of plants to give you the plants in nature. So some parting thoughts. These are all my thoughts, my opinions, and my interpretation of our definition. We all know the judge is going to do what the judge is going to do. Make your image about the geometry of the subject, not just a portrait of the subject. Which is why this image, which I took with a cell phone of falling water, and as lovely an image as it is, does not meet the definition of geometric photography, even though it is a portrait of a house with a strong geometric presence. This does not mean you could not take geometric photography of this house. It just means this one's not it. Be brave, bold, and be willing to experiment. So in closing, as I read our definition, this, which is part of a mill race, is a geometric photograph. Questions? Oh, my work's done.
The very first image you had up when you were talking about it was circular, it was a window, and you said it was
Okay.
flat.
1 second. Let me see if I can get that to come up.
No, but the one before the
Window.
millstone. That one.
That one.
The thought came to mind because whether because we saw one of your images in contest or we know it's a window. Doesn't the brain interpret something like that as not just flat, but knowing that there's something behind it? Don't we give it 3 dimension in our brains?
Yes and no. This is where it's learning how to see the geometry and not the object.
Right.
And this is one of the things that when I looked at it, the first thing I saw were the circles. It's one of the things that I do, and I don't know any other way to explain it, is to be able to look at it. And when I looked at this window, yes, it's a window. Brain registered, yeah, it's a window. But what my brain registered first was this shape, these shapes, and then the square formed by, this is actually a change in the wood grain that went around it. And that's what I saw. So yes, I see it as a window, but I see it as the shape. Answer your question?
Anyone else?
Oh dear.
At the risk of playing devil's advocate, going back to falling water, is that because there's too much nature and greenery around it?
Yes and no. This is a picture about the house as a whole. So it's a portrait of the house. The shapes are there, but it's not about the shape. It's about, this is falling water. And that's why I said if you were to go back, if you were to visit there, to take photographs of it, you could probably get some very good geometric photographs of it, because it does have a good, strong geometric presence. These cantilevers are fantastic. And the way he's got things sticking out of it, when you get closer to the house, it would be easier to portray that as a geometric piece, as opposed to wonderful picture of the house.
So you need to get close and emphasize the shapes.
Emphasize the shapes.
Even to the point of having someone wonder where it was.
To the point, you would not necessarily have to take it to abstract, But you could have them kind of wonder, I think I know this place, but maybe not.
Yeah, Jackie, I know you said you didn't have any photos of plants in nature that you wanted to show, but just want to ask the question. Would you consider, say, a picture of a leaf cropped in, just the veins in the leaf, if they was highlighted? Would that be considered like geometric shapes, you think?
Yes, it could be.
Okay.
I would say could be. Part of it's going to depend upon the leaf and the types of veining you've got going on, but absolutely.
Okay.
And it would fall usually more under the idea of the fractal work, if you were looking to classify it, which I said, fortunately, we don't have to classify them, but it would be more of a fractal type of an image.
Yeah.
And
No, I really like abstracts and everything, you know what I mean? So, I do a lot of like, when it's frozen and it starts thawing out, I like to shoot the ice, the bubbles, the lines under the ice, when it's thawing out. I like to do all of that type of stuff. So I'm trying to figure out, would that be considered maybe if some type of,
Yes.
it's abstract to me, but would it convey over to geometric shapes also?
yeah, look for your shapes. Make your image about the shapes. Yes. Well, there is that too. It always depends upon the judge.
Oh, yeah, I'm not thinking about the judge, I'm thinking about what I enjoy.
Right. Other questions?
Other questions? Thank you, Jackie. That was fantastic.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and we will see you next week for our, is it
Prints,
print contest?
open theme.
See you next week.